What is going on, guys? My name is John and welcome back to yet another video. All the way back in November, I uploaded another installment of the Catch 'em All series on my channel with the most recent games, Pokemon Sword and Shield. Although at the time I figured this was the end of the Catch 'em All for this part of the generation, Game Freak had other plans. Today we're going to find out how easy you can catch every Pokemon in Sword and Shield's Isle of Armor DLC. Now if you haven't seen the last video or don't know exactly what this video is all about, I've linked a playlist so you can check out in the top right of your screen to better understand what this video is all about. Regardless, let's go over the rules that are set in place. The first rule is you have to play both copies of Pokemon Sword and Shield. Because this is an extension to the base game, I'm going to use the save files from the previous games to take on this challenge. Now you could totally do this with a brand new game, but considering that there are a ton of Pokemon only available in the water or on islands, I figured that would be insanely boring to watch me talk about the same storyline events like I did in the last video. The second rule is we had to collect one of each Pokemon, and by the end of the challenge I should have a complete living dex of each and every Pokemon. If you watched these videos before, you know that I only grabbed the new Pokemon introduced in each generation, but considering that there are only 2 new Pokemon in this expansion, I decided to just catch all the new Pokemon that have been added to Sword and Shield through this DLC. It may not sound that bad, but there are actually more added here than the new Galar Pokemon in the base game, so there will still be a lot to catch. I normally set a time frame to complete this, but considering that I recorded this a day after the DLC dropped, I didn't really have a time frame, but per usual, I'm trying to do this as fast as possible. One final thing that I'd like to note is that because I knew this would be significantly easier to complete than the base game, I decided to try and get nearly every Pokemon without evolving, which means I have to catch everything that I need in the overworld. This definitely made it a lot more challenging than it needed to be, but it'll be a lot more entertaining for you. The entirety of this challenge was streamed on my Twitch channel, so if you're interested in watching challenges like this live, I'll leave a link to my channel in the description. Before we get into the video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more videos like this, and with that out of the way, let's just jump right into it. So our journey continues all the way back in Wedgehurst Station, where we meet our newest pair of rivals, Avery and Clara, and we're immediately forced to grab the first Pokemon on our journey. Although you come to see that this Slowpoke really isn't all too rare within the Isle of Armor, we don't have a choice but to catch this, so we start our total before we even take a step in the new area. After redeeming our armor pass, we can fly to the right side of the Galar region, and we're immediately thrown into the new area with very few restrictions. We're challenged to a battle with our rivals, but this is one of the very few matches that are mandatory on the island. Considering that this DLC was branded as the exploration side of Sword and Shield's double expansion, this whole location is almost entirely based on catching Pokemon and interacting with the expanded wild area. As I mentioned earlier, aside from the water areas, you can access just about everything within the Isle of Armor, but there are a few little roadblocks I discovered while I was streaming that I'll talk about in a bit. As we head to the dojo, we're greeted by a hiker and a Diglett, and this is the start of the Diglett side quest, which requires you to encounter a whole bunch of them throughout the entirety of the Isle of Armor. In total, there are 150 that you have to go out and collect, but thankfully we don't have to collect all of them. Upon arriving at the dojo, we meet our mentor Mustard and the rest of the members in the dojo, and we can begin the main chunk of the story surrounding completing the 3 trials. Now, like I mentioned before, we're now able to access just about everywhere in the Isle of Armor, and we're free to just never complete the story and catch all that we want. But there are a few small roadblocks that have to be addressed. The first issue is that Kubfu obviously needs to be collected in both games at some point, which requires us to complete more of the story, and there's also another special Pokemon that we're going to collect much later on, so regardless of how we approach this challenge, we're going to have to complete up to the point where we can evolve Kubfu in one of the games. Thankfully though, this doesn't take too much time, but there is another problem that I discovered while I was streaming. When I tried to change the day to adjust the weather patterns, I noticed that only the water areas and the Fields of Honor would change to the correct weather, and the other locations would be completely random. Come to find out, the weather doesn't change everywhere on the 15th of each month until you evolve Kubfu, which basically requires you to complete like 90% of the storyline, so that definitely messed up a majority of my time considering that I had to figure out an updated route on the fly. Fortunately enough, a lot of the weather was actually what I needed for each area, but you'll notice that there's a lot of jumping around in the later half of the run when I can actually adjust the patterns correctly. As Shield is working on catching the rocket-boosted Slowpoke in the wetlands, Sword is in the Field of Honor working on building up the total. Here we can get another Slowpoke, Baneri, and Klefki, but it's also important to search through the trees to collect as many Galarica twigs as I can possibly find. These are randomly scattered at the base of trees within the Isles of Armor, and we're going to need to collect 8 in order to add another Pokemon to the total. From my testing, there are like 2 that are always in the same location, but aside from that, this can take all of 5 minutes, or 30 to get the proper amount. As we're heading to take on the same quest, Shield is already finished up and back at the dojo for a second trial. Before we do that, Mustard gives us the option of claiming either Bulbasaur or Squirtle as a gift. For this game, we're going to pick Squirtle. You know, it's a little weird that they didn't give Charmander as an option. I know you can get one in the base game, but part of me feels like Game Freak just doesn't give Charizard the love it deserves. I mean, seriously, it's a little ridiculous at this point. It's almost like they act like it doesn't exist, and they should really consider trying. During the Fast Poke quest, I decided to take some more time in Sword to catch the easily accessible Pokemon remaining in the Fields of Honor, as well as the Soothing Wetlands as I'm trying to finish the mission. Back in the first area again, we can get Chansey, Abra, Jigglypuff, and Happiny in the grass, which is the only exclamation point encounter that we have to worry about. And within the wetlands, we can get Dunsparce, Poliwhirl, Lickitung, and a Static Buffalant before collecting the Bulbasaur as our starter. This brings the total to 12 Pokemon. During this catching spree, Shield was working on the other trials, which involves you finding a max mushroom all the way in the most northern part of the island, which also leads to another battle with our rival. During this process, you're supposed to head through the Forest of Focus per Mustard's instructions, and I accidentally ran into a static Scolipede that I planned on catching later, so I just decided to add that to the total now. After this, we can head back to the dojo and challenge Avery again to complete the final trial. As a reward for becoming Mustard's favorite apprentice in the span of 45 minutes, he gives us the main attraction to the DLC, Kubfu. Now at this point, it's safe to assume that this is the end of the story, and we're once again free to do whatever we want. But there is technically one more challenge that we're going to have to take on. In order to evolve Kubfu and unlock the correct weather, we're going to have to bring it to either the Tower of Waters at Challenge Beach, or the Tower of Darkness on Challenge Road. The process of climbing the tower isn't necessarily difficult by any means, however there is one big issue that can make this quite a challenge. In order to reach the top of one of the towers, Kubfu must be the only Pokemon in your party, and if you collected all the badges in the Galar region before you take this on, all of the trainer's Pokemon will be around level 60. Considering that we get Kubfu at level 10 and it's in the slow experience group, we're going to need to spend a lot of time leveling it up. Thankfully, there are a ton of methods that yield a ton of experience, so I decided to take it upon myself to test out the best option between both games. In Shield, I spent a ton of time trying to gain XP from catching Pokemon, but I also mixed in some raid battles to try and see if this would be faster. Sword, on the other hand, I tried my luck against Wild Chansey because of their high experience output, but I'll talk more about the results in a little bit. One last important thing to note about obtaining Kubfu is that more areas have been unlocked for weather changes. Now all but 2 locations get us the correct weather, but we're obviously still going to have to climb the tower to make it a little easier in the long run. At this point, Sword is still a little behind with catching all the Pokemon earlier, but eventually the second Kubfu was claimed, and the true part of the challenge really begins. Aside from being at a pretty high recommended level, another task you have to complete involves bonding with your Kubfu. This requires you to visit a few different locations on the map, and it basically forces you to check out the remaining areas that you weren't already told to go to in the story. Because there's a lot of biking to do, this is a great time to grab as many new Pokemon as we can. Starting out on Challenge Beach, we can catch Psyduck, Magnemite, and Shinx in the overworld, as well as Staryu that appears as statics in the sand. After completing all the bonding locations, Sword was able to check back in with Mustard, who tells us that we can ascend the tower whenever we're ready. Obviously, we're not at the right level to take care of that, so it's time to take care of some more encounters. Heading north of Challenge Beach, we can access the Insular Sea. Here we can catch Horsey and Tentacool, but I also managed to find Clawitzer, which is a 1% encounter in the water areas. I plan to catch this later, but this will help save a ton of time considering how limited the water encounters actually are. If we head to the top of the map, we can visit the Honeycomb Sea. If there's a thunderstorm, we can grab Seadra and Kingdra as a static encounter. Heading back to land, we can grab Pinsir and Lillipup at the Training Lowlands through overworld encounters, as well as fish for Carvanha in the water, which is the only fishing encounter that we have to worry about in this expansion. It's also important to grab the upgrade by this rock, as we're going to need it for Porygon later on. Finally, within the warm-up tunnel, we can grab the static Cubone and Sandshrew, which brings our total to over a quarter of the dex. It may not seem like much, but don't worry, we're going to add a ton of Pokemon very soon. At this point, I decided to train up my Kubfu, and considering that Chansey spawns pretty frequently and Kubfu is a fighting-type Pokemon, I figured that this would be much easier than doing raids. I was wrong. This ended up taking a lot more time than I thought, but like I said earlier, this was basically an experiment, but I definitely should have realized that this wasn't really the best option I could have gone for. Let's check on Shield in the meantime. Although all the areas aren't unlocked yet, I still took some time to grab as much as I could before I took on the tower, and considering that there are a few Pokemon that you can only encounter through raids, I figured this was also a good opportunity for Kubfu to shine. Starting back in the Fields of Honor, we can catch Blissey and Comfey, Fomantis as an overworld encounter, and Politoed, Licky, and Kadabra as statics in the Soothing Wetlands. For now, we're going to avoid the encounters in the Forest of Focus, but it's a good time to grab Whirlipede through the raid dens, as this is one of 2 Pokemon that are only accessible through max raid battles. The only other Pokemon is coincidentally only a few steps away, but there's a small issue that I didn't consider. Exploud was not only a pain to get as a raid despite being a 20% chance, but it's also just a very difficult raid to do solo. Considering my allies consisted of a Magikarp and everyone's favorite Cosmic Power Solrock, it was more of an issue that my teammates could be one-shot so easily rather than not being able to deal enough damage. Although I really wanted to catch it, I decided to just catch a Loudred instead because it's safe to say this would have easily taken over an hour to get lucky enough to win that battle. Heading back through the warm-up tunnel, we can access the Pot Bottom Desert. After a few weather changes, we can catch Fletchling and Sandile in the overworld, as well as get Marowak, Sandslash, and this Pokemon that I probably can't say the name of or I'll get demonetized. After taking out some of the active raids around the island, I managed to find a Lycanroc raid, which gave me enough XP to be ready to take on the tower. Coincidentally, this is around the same time that this was done in Sword. In the process of heading there, I managed to catch Luxio at the Fields of Honor, and Clauncher in the Insular Sea. No matter which tower you decide to climb, the process is the same. You fight one of the dojo members in a 1v1 battle, and these really aren't that difficult to get through. Upon reaching the top floor, we meet with Mustard and are challenged to a final battle to test our worth. We have to fight his own Kubfu, and you're basically guaranteed to lose unless you're at the same level as his Pokemon. Because I knew it would take too long to level it up, I decided to risk it, and I lost. I was worried that this was going to take too long to do, but one of my viewers in my stream gave me a really good suggestion. Because you can't one-shot his Pokemon because it's holding a Focus Sash, they said I should give my Kubfu a Rocky Helmet and then use Counter. By doing this, the helmet will break the sash, and because it deals so much damage with Aerial Ace, you're guaranteed to win as long as you can live the first hit. After an extremely quick second attempt, Mustard offers to teach us the ways of the scroll behind him, and after showing it to Kubfu, it immediately evolved into Urshifu. Although we're basically done and can catch whatever we want now, there are still a few more quests that we're going to have to do in order to obtain one last important Pokemon. In the meantime, let's focus on Shield. So if you've been paying attention, there's a glaring issue that we're going to have to deal with. Don't we have to evolve Kubfu if we want to unlock all the weather patterns? And that's a fantastic question. At the time, chat and I had zero idea if this was even possible, but considering that it would be a huge oversight if you could essentially never have a Kubfu, I gave the game the benefit of the doubt that you could just not evolve it, and the game kind of tricks you into thinking that you have to. Now normally during the evolution sequence you can just press B and it will stop evolving, but with this it actually forces it to evolve. The only way that you can choose to not evolve it is if you deny showing the scroll when Mustard offers it. The most interesting part is that he offers to leave the tower open until you decide to evolve it, which means that you can complete the story and leave the tower open forever. There's really not a benefit to doing this, but considering that 99.9% of people can't access the tower after completing the story, it's a pretty unique thing to have in your game. Although this is the part where I start catching everything, let's take a second to finish up Sword side of the game before we blow our current total out of the water. After heading back to the dojo, we find that our rival Hop has visited the island, and we're tasked with trying to collect ingredients for our Gigantamax soup that only Urshifu can have. After dealing with the events in the forest and having a battle against a giant Vespiquen, we can return back to the dojo to complete the final side quest within the DLC. The only thing that we're required to take care of now is our final battle against Mustard. Considering that our team is actually pretty on par with his team, I have to say that this battle is genuinely pretty difficult. I think that they bumped up the AI for this match because there were some pretty wild predictions that happened, but after nearly a 10-minute battle, we've successfully completed the Isle of Armor DLC. Upon heading back into the gym, if we head into Mustard's room, we can now collect Porygon, bringing the total to 46 Pokemon. Now it's time to really catch some Pokemon. Starting on Pokemon Shield, in the Soothing Wetlands, we can catch Zorua, Foongus, Venipede, Tangela, Tangrowth, Amoonguss, Larvesta, and Emolga in the Forest of Focus, Wigglytuff, Starmie, Azumarill, Dedenne, Marill, Lopunny, Lurantis, and Fletchinder at Challenge Beach, Exeggutor in the Insular Sea, Petalil and Lilligant at the Honeycomb Island, Tauros, Heracross, Miltank, Scyther, Kangaskhan, Scizor, Talonflame, Herdier, and Stoutland at the Training Lowlands, Mienshao in Challenge Road, Skrelp and Tentacruel in the Workout Sea, and Sandygast, Palisand, Zoroark, and Alakazam in the Loop Lagoon. This brings a total to 81 Pokemon. I also made sure to redeem my 10 Diglett for the Cantonian Slowpoke, who is conveniently holding the King's Rock for a trade. In Pokemon Sword, I was able to catch Magnezone at Challenge Beach, Krokorok and Krookodile at the Pot Bottom Desert, Skarmory, Mienfoo, and Rockruff on Challenge Road, Whismur, Loudred, Druddigon, Poliwrath, Azurill, and Golduck in the Brawler's Cave, and Execute in the Workout Sea. This brings a total to 94 Pokemon. I told you it was gonna go quick. At this point, I took the time to evolve my remaining catches, as well as breed the very few Pokemon I needed to catch to finish up this catch-em-all. I would like to note that in Sword, I spent a decent amount of time roaming around collecting twigs and the dubious disc, and upon bringing that to a lady on the small island, she was able to turn the twigs into the Galarica cuff. Through breeding, I was able to get 2 Bulbasaur, Igglybuff, and 2 Porygon in Sword, and 2 Squirtle in Shield. Now let's take care of the evolutions. After an extremely quick bit of grinding and trading, I was able to evolve our catches to get 2 Bulbasaur to Ivysaur and Venusaur, Galarian Slowpoke to Slowbro, Loudred to Exploud, Skrelp to Dragalge, 2 Squirtle to Wartortle and Blastoise, 2 Porygon to Porygon 2 and Porygon Z, and Slowpoke to Slowking. While I was organizing my boxes, I realized that I missed 1 Pokemon in each game. So in Sword, I went back to Brawler's Cave to catch Poliwag, and in Shield, I ironically caught the 1 Pokemon I spent the entire run avoiding, Sharpedo. And with that, we successfully caught every new Pokemon available in the Isle of Armor DLC. But how did I do? So let's review. As you'd expect, I was able to complete both games in nearly the exact same amount of time, and for each game it took about 4.5 hours to complete the entire dex. I can confidently say this is definitely not the best time in the world, and you can do this a whole lot faster. But considering that I spent a portion of this testing out methods, and I was also streaming at the same time, I'm pretty okay with how I did. I definitely think there was some tweaking that can be done to bring this down to about 2 hours per game, but there were many points where some Pokemon were just mind-numbingly annoying to catch. A big portion of that is the fact that there are so many special Pokemon that you can get that have absurdly low catch rates, so there's bound to be at least one Pokemon that'll take you like 10 minutes to catch. I briefly mentioned this beforehand, but I want to apologize for not grabbing any of the Alolan starters. At the time of the recording, no one really knew it was a reward for collecting 100 Diglett, but considering that I could only get 2 lines, and that they're not actually even in the Galar or the Isle of Armor Pokedex, I don't really feel too bad about it. As always, if you're interested in taking on the challenge for yourself, I've included a bunch of links in the description, including my guides to help you either catch them all, or find that one special Pokemon you've been dying to catch. If you made it this far, I'd really appreciate it if you took the time to check out my Twitch channel that I've been working on over the past few months. Right now we're doing a Nuzlocke of Pokemon Black, and I know that it's an old concept, but my chat can attest that it's a hilarious experience that even you can participate in. I stream nearly every day at 4:30 Eastern, so if you're interested in checking that out, I tweet out every time that I go live. Other than that, that's all there is to say about catching every Pokemon in Sword and Shield's Isle of Armor expansion. And that's gonna do it for today's video. If you liked the video, leave a like and consider subscribing, as I'll be making more content like this very soon. If you have any other suggestions for videos that you'd like to see, leave a comment below. Follow me on Twitter to keep updated with new videos as they come out. If you're interested in watching me take on challenges live, I've been streaming a lot over on my Twitch account, as well as upload highlights on my Johnstone live channel that you can find in the description. Other than that, I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.